Chapter 7 Federalism Introduction. Look at the political maps on next two pages of India, 1947 and 2017. They have changed dramatically over the years. Boundaries of states have changed, name of states have changed, and the number of states have changed. When India became independent, we had a number of provinces that the British government had organized only for administrative convenience. Then a number of princely states merged with the newly independent Indian Union. These were joined to the existing provinces. This is what you see in the first map. Since then, boundaries of states have reorganized many times. During this entire period, not only did boundaries of state change, but in some cases even their names change according to the wishes of the people of those states. Thus, Mysore changed to Karnataka and Madras became Tamil Nadu. The maps show these large scale changes that have taken place in the span of over 70 years. In a way, these maps also tell us the story of functioning of federalism in India. After studying this chapter, you will be able to understand the following. What is federalism? The federal provisions in the Indian Constitution, the issues involved in the relations between the center and the states, and the special provisions for certain states having a distinct composition and historical features. What is federalism? USSR was one of the world's superpowers, but after 1989, it is simply broke up into several independent countries. One of the major reasons for its breakup was the excessive centralization and concentration of power and the domination of Russia over other regions with independent languages and cultures of their own, Uzbekistan. Some other countries like Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and Pakistan also had to face a division of the country. Canada came very close to a break-up between the English-speaking and the French-speaking regions of that country. Isn't it a great achievement that India, which emerged as an independent nation-state in 1947 after a painful partition, has remained united over 6 decades of its independent existence? What accounts for this achievement? Can we attribute it to the federal structure of governance that we in India adopted through our constitution? All the countries mentioned above were federations, yet they could not remain united. Therefore, apart from adopting a federal constitution, the nature of that federal system and the practice of federalism must also be important factors. India is a land of continental proportions and immense diversities. There are more than 20 major languages and several hundred minor ones. It is the home of several major religions. There are several million indigenous peoples living in different parts of the country. In spite of all these diversities, we share a common landmass. We have also participated in a common history, especially when we fought for independence. We also share many other important features. This has led our national leaders to visualize India as a country where there is unity in diversity. Sometimes it is described as unity with diversity. Federalism does not consist of a set of fixed principles which are applied to different historical situations. Rather, federalism as a principle of government has evolved differently in different situations. American federalism, one of the first major attempts to build a federal polity, is different from German or Indian federalism, but there are also a few key ideas and concepts associated with federalism. Essentially, federalism is an institutional mechanism to accommodate two sets of polities, one at the regional level and the other at the national level. Each government is autonomous in its own sphere. In some federal countries, there is even a system of dual citizenship. India has only a single citizenship. The people, likewise, have two sets of identities and loyalties. They belong to the region as well as to the nation. For example, we are Gujaratis or Jharkhandis as well as Indians. Each level of the polity has distinct powers and responsibilities and has a separate system of government. The details of this dual system of government are generally spelled out in a written constitution, which is considered to be supreme and which is also the source of the power of both sets of government. Certain subjects which concern the nation as a whole, for example, defense or currency, are the responsibility of the union or central government. Regional or local matters are the responsibility of the regional or state government. To prevent conflicts between the center and the state, there is an independent judiciary to settle disputes. The judiciary has the powers to resolve disputes between the central government and the states on legal matters about the division of power. Real politics, culture, ideology, and history determine the actual working of a federation. A culture of trust, cooperation, mutual respect, and restraint helps federation to function smoothly. Political parties also determine the way a constitution would work. If any single unit or state or linguistic group or ideology comes to dominate the entire federation, it could generate a deep resentment among people or its unit not sharing the dominant voice. These situations could lead to demands for succession by the aggrieved units or could even result in civil wars. Many countries are embroiled in such conflict situations. Federalism in Nigeria. If the regions and the various communities do not trust each other, even a federal arrangement can fail to produce unity. The example of Nigeria is instructive. Till 1940, northern and southern Nigeria were two separate British colonies. At the Ibadan Constitutional Conference of the 1950, Nigerian leaders decided to form a federal constitution. The three major ethnic groups of Nigeria, Yoruba, Ibo, and Hausa Fulani, controlled the regions of the west, the east, and the north, respectively. Their attempt to spread their influence to other regions led to fears and conflicts. These led to a military regime. In the 1960 constitution, both federal and regional governments jointly controlled the Nigerian police. In the military supervised constitution of 1979, no state was allowed to have any civil police. Though democracy was restored in Nigeria in 1999, religious differences, along with conflicts over who will control revenues from the soil resources, continue to present problems before the Nigerian Federation. Local ethnic communities resist centralized control of the oil resources. Thus, Nigeria is an example of overlap of religious, ethnic, and economic differences among the units. Federalism of the Indian Constitution. Even before independence, most leaders of our national movement were aware that to govern a large country like ours, it would be necessary to divide the powers between provinces and the central government. There was also awareness that Indian society had regional diversity and linguistic diversity. This diversity needed recognition. People of different regions and languages had to share power and in each region, people of that region should govern themselves. This was only logical if you wanted a democratic government. The only question was that what should be the extent of powers to be enjoyed by the regional governments in view of the agitation of the Muslim League for greater representation of the Muslims. A compromise formula to give very large powers to the regions was discussed during the negotiations before partition. Once the decision to partition India was taken, the Constituent Assembly decided to frame a government that would be based on the principles of unity and cooperation between the center and the states, and separate powers to the states. The most important feature of the federal system adopted by the Indian Constitution is the principle that relations between the state and the center would be based on the cooperation. Thus, while recognizing diversity, the Constitution emphasized unity. Do you know, for example, that the Constitution of India does not even mention the word federation? This is how the Constitution describes India. Article 1st says that India, that is Bharat, shall be union of states. The states and the territories thereof shall be specified in the first schedule. Division of powers. There are two sets of government created by the Indian Constitution, one for the entire nation called the Union Government, and one for each unit or state called the state government. Both of these have a constitutional status and clearly identified area of activity. If there is any dispute about which powers comes under the control of the union and which under the states, this can be resolved by the judiciary on the basis of the constitutional provisions. The constitution clearly demarcates subjects which are under the exclusive domain of the union and those under the states. One of the most important aspects of this division of powers is that economic and financial powers are centralized in the hands of the central government by the Constitution. The states have immense responsibilities but very meager revenue sources. Federalism with a strong central government. It is generally accepted that the Indian constitution has created a strong central government. India is a country of continental dimensions with immense diversities and social problems. The framers of the constitution believed that we required a federal constitution that would accommodate diversities, but they also wanted to create a strong center to stem disintegration and bring about social and political change. It was necessary for the center to have such powers because India at the time of independence was not only divided into provinces created by the British, but there were more than 500 princely states which had to be integrated into existing states or new states had to be created. Besides the concerns of unity, the makers of the Constitution also believed that the socio-economic problems of the country needed to be handled by a strong central government in cooperation with the states. Poverty, illiteracy, and inequalities of wealth were some of the problems that required planning and coordination. Thus, the concerns for unity and development prompted the makers of the Constitution to create a strong central government. Let us look at the important provisions that create a strong central government. Number one, the very existence of a state, including its territorial integrity, is in the hands of Parliament. The Parliament is empowered to form a new state by separation of territory from any state or by uniting two or more states. It can also alter the boundary of any state or even its name. The Constitution provides for some safeguards by way of securing the view of the concerned state legislature. The, the Constitution, number two, the Constitution has certain very powerful emergency provisions which can turn our federal polity into a highly centralized system once emergency is declared. During an emergency, powers become lawfully centralized. Parliament also assumes the power to make laws on subjects within the jurisdictions of the states. Even during normal circumstances, the central government has very effective financial powers and responsibilities. In the first place, items generating revenue are under the control of the central government. Then, the central government has many revenue resources, and states are mostly dependent on the grants and financial assistance from the center. Secondly, India adopted planning as an instrument of rapid economic progress and development after independence. Planning led to considerable centralization of economic decision making. Planning Commission appointed by the Union government is the coordinating machinery that controls and supervises the resources management of the states. Besides, the Union government uses its discretion to give grants to loans of the states. This distribution of economic resources is considered lopsided and has led to charges of discrimination against states ruled by an opposition party. As you will study later, the government has certain powers to recommend dismissal of the state government and the dissolution of the assembly. Besides, even in normal circumstances, the governor has the power to reserve a bill passed by the state legislature for the assent of the president. This gives the central government an opportunity to delay the state legislation and also to examine such bills and veto them completely. There may be occasions when the situation may demand that the central government needs to legislate on matters that from the state list. This is possible if the move is ratified by the Rajya Sabha. The Constitution clearly states that the executive powers of the center are superior to the executive powers of the states. Furthermore, the central government may choose to give instructions to the state government. The following extract from an article of the Constitution makes this clear. Article 257 1. The executive power of every state shall be so exercised as not to impede or prejudice the exercise of the executive power of the Union, and the executive power of the Union shall extend to the giving of such directions to a state as may appear to the Government of India to be necessary for that purpose. You have already studied in the chapter on executive that we have an integrated administrative system. The All India services are common to the entire territory of India, and officers chosen for these services serve in the administration of the states. Thus, an IAS officer who becomes the collector or an IPS officer who serves as the commissioner of police are under the control of the central government. States can neither take disciplinary action nor can they remove these officers from service. Article 33 and 34 authorize the Parliament to protect persons in the service of the Union or a state in respect of any action taken by them during martial law to maintain or restore order. This provision further strengthens the powers of the Indian government. The Armed Forces Special Powers Act has been made on the basis of these provisions. The act has created tensions between the people and the armed forces on some occasions. Conflicts in India's federal system. In the previous section, we have seen that the Constitution has vested very strong powers in the center. Thus, the Constitution recognizes the separate identity of the regions and yet gives more powers to the center. Once the principle of identity of the state is accepted, it is quite natural that the states would expect a greater role and powers in the governance of the state and the country as a whole. This leads to various demands from the chapter. From time to time, states have demanded that they should be given more powers and more autonomy. This leads to tensions and conflicts in the relations between the center and the states, while the legal disputes between the center and the states can be resolved by the judiciary. Demands for autonomy are of political nature and needs to be resolved through negotiations. Center state relations. The Constitution is only a framework or a skeleton. Its flesh and the blood is provided by the actual process of politics. Hence, federalism in India has to a large extent been influenced by the changing nature of the political process. In the 1950s and the early 1960s, the foundation of our federalism was laid under Jawaharlal Nehru. It was also a period of the Congress dominance over the center as well as the states. Except on the issue of formation of new states, the relations between the center and the states remained quite normal. The states were hopeful that they would be making progress with the help of the grants and aid from the center. Besides, there was considerable optimism about the policies of socio-economic development designed by the center. In the middle of the 1960s, Congress dominance declined somewhat, and in a large number of states, opposition parties came to power. It resulted in demands for greater powers and greater autonomy to the states. In fact, these demands were a direct fallout of the fact that different parties were ruling at the center and in many states. So, the state government were protesting against what they saw as unnecessary interference in their government by the Congress government at the center. The Congress too was not very comfortable with the idea of dealing with governments led by the opposition parties. This peculiar political context gave birth to a discussion about the concept of autonomy under the federal system. Finally, since the 1990s, Congress dominance has largely ended, and we have entered an era of coalition politics, especially at the center. In the states, too, different parties, both national and regional, have come to power. This has resulted in greater say for the states, a respect for diversity, and the beginning of a more mature federalism. Thus, it is in the second phase that the issue of autonomy becomes very potent politically. Demands for autonomy. Many states and even many political parties have, from time to time, demanded the states should have more autonomy vis a vis the central government. However, autonomy refers to different things for different states and parties. Sometimes, these demands expect that the division of the powers should be changed in favor of the states and more powers and important powers be assigned to the states. Many states have made demands for autonomy from time to time. Another demand is that the states should have independent sources of revenue and greater control over the resources. This is also known as financial autonomy. In 1977, the document demanding a restructuring of center state relations in India in the autonomy demands of Tamil Nadu and Punjab also, there was an implicit support to the idea of greater financial powers. The third aspect of the autonomy demands relates to administrative powers of the state. States resent the control of the center over the administrative machinery. Fourthly, autonomy demands may also be related to the cultural and linguistic issues. The opposition to the domination of Hindi or demand for advancing the Punjabi language and culture are instances of this. Some states also feel that there is the domination of the Hindi speaking areas over the others. In fact, during the decade of 1960s, there were agitations in some states against the imposition of the Hindi language. Role of governors and president's rule. The role of governors has always been a controversial issue between the states and the central government. The governor is not an elected office holder. Many governors have been retired military officers or civil servants or politicians. Besides, the governor is appointed by the central government, and therefore actions of the governor are often viewed as interference by the central government when in the functioning of the state government. When two different parties are of the governor becomes even more controversial. The Sarkaria Commission that was appointed by the central government to examine the issues relating to center state relations recommended that appointments of governors should be strictly non-partisan. Powers and role of the governor become controversial for one or more reasons. One of the most controversial articles in the Constitution is Article 356, which provides for president rule in any state. This provision is to be applied when a situation has arisen in which the government of the state cannot be carried on in accordance with the provisions of this Constitution. It results in the takeover of the state government by the union government. The President's proclamation has to be ratified by Parliament. President's rule can be extended till 3 years. The Governor has the power to recommend the dismissal of the state government and suspension or dissolution of state assembly. This dismissed even when they had a majority in the legislature and has had happened in Kerala in 1959 or without testing their majority as happened in several other states after 1967. Some cases went to the Supreme Court and the court has ruled a constitutional validity of the decision to impose President's rule can be examined by the judiciary. Article 356 was very sparingly used till 1967. After 1967, many states had non Congress governments, and the Congress was in power at the center. The center has often used this provision to dismiss state governments or has used the office of the governor to prevent the majority power or coalition from assuming office. For instance, the central government removed elected governments in Andhra Pradesh and Jammu and Kashmir in the decade of 1980s. Demands for new state. The other dimension of tension in our federal system has been the demand to create new states. The national movement not only created a pan-Indian national unity, it also generated distinct unity around a common language, region and culture. Our national movement was also a movement for democracy. Therefore, in the course of the national movement itself, it was decided that as far as possible, states would be created on the basis of common cultural and linguistic identity. This ultimately led to the demand of the creation of linguistic states after independence. In December 1953, the States Reorganization Commission was set up and it recommended the creation of linguistic states, at least for the major linguistic groups. In 1956, reorganization of some states took place. This saw the beginning of the creation of linguistic states, and the process is still continuing. Gujarat and Maharashtra were created in 1960. Punjab and Haryana were separated from each other in 1966. Later, the northeastern region was reorganized and new states like Manipur, Tripura, Meghalaya, Mizoram, and Arunachal were created. In 2000, some of the larger states were further divided both to meet the demands of a separate state as well as to meet the need of the greater administration efficiency. Thus, Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, and Bihar were divided to create three new states. They are Chhattisgarh, Uttarakhand, and Jharkhand, respectively. Some regions and linguistic groups are still struggling for separate statehood, like Vidarbha in Maharashtra. Interstate conflicts. While the states keep fighting with the center over autonomy and other issues like the share in revenue resources, there have been many instances of disputes between two states or among more than two states. It is true that the judiciary acts as the arbitration mechanism on disputes of a legal nature, but these disputes are in reality not just legal. They have political implications and therefore they can be best resolved only through negotiations and mutual understanding. Broadly, two types of disputes keep recurring. One is the border dispute. States have certain claims over territories belonging to neighboring states. Though language is the basis of defining boundaries of the states, often border areas would have populations speaking more than one language, so it is not easy to resolve this dispute merely on the basis of linguistic majority. One of the long standing border disputes is the dispute between Maharashtra and Karnataka over the city of Belgaum, Manipur, and Nagaland too have a long standing border dispute. The carving out of Haryana and the erstwhile state of Punjab has led to dispute between the two states not only over border areas but over the capital city of Chandigarh. This city houses the capital of both these states. In 1985, the then Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi reached an understanding with the leadership of Punjab. According to this understanding, Chandigarh was to be handed over to Punjab, but this has not happened yet. While border disputes are more about sentiment, the disputes over the sharing of river waters are even more serious because they are related to problems of drinking water and agriculture in the concerned state. You must have heard the Kaveri water dispute. This is a major issue between Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. Farmers in both the states are dependent on Kaveri waters. Though there is a river water tribunal to settle water disputes, this dispute has reached to the Supreme Court. In another similar dispute, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, and Maharashtra are battling over the sharing of waters of Narmada River. Rivers are major resource and therefore disputes over river waters test the patience and cooperative spirits of the states. Special provisions. The most extraordinary feature of the federal arrangement created in India is that many states get a differential treatment. We have already noted that in the chapter of legislature that the size and population of these states being different and asymmetrical representation is provided in the Rajya Sabha while ensuring minimum representation to each of the smaller states. This arrangement also ensures that larger states would get more representation. In the case of division of powers too, the Constitution provides a division of powers that is common to all the states, and yet the Constitution has some special provisions for some states given their peculiar social and historical circumstances. Most of the special provisions pertain to the northeastern states Assam, Nagaland, Arunachal Pradesh, Mizoram, largely due to sizable indigenous tribal population with a distinct history and culture which they wish to retain. However, these provisions have not been able to stem all alienation and the insurgency in parts of the region. Special provisions also exist for hilly states like Himachal Pradesh and some other states like Andhra Pradesh, Goa, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Sikkim, and Telangana. Jammu and Kashmir. The other state which has a special status is Jammu and Kashmir, JNK, Article 370. Jammu and Kashmir was one of the large princely states which had the option of joining India or Pakistan at the time of independence. Immediately after independence, Pakistan and India fought a war over Kashmir. Under such circumstances, the Maharaja of Kashmir acceded to the Indian Union. Most of the Muslim majority states joined Pakistan, but J&K was an exception. Under these circumstances, it was much greater autonomy by the Constitution. According to Article 370, the concurrence of the state is required to making any laws in matters mentioned in the Union and the concurrent list. This is different from the position of other states. In the case of other states, the division of powers as listed through the tree list automatically applies. In the case of Jammu and Kashmir, the central government has only limited powers and other powers listed in the union list, and the concurrent list can be used only with the consent of the central government of the state government. This gives the state of Jammu and Kashmir greater autonomy. In practice, however, the autonomy of JNK is much less than what the language of Article 370 may suggest. There is a constitutional provision that allows the President, with the concurrence of the state government, to specify which states of the union list shall apply to the state. The President has issued two constitutional orders in concurrence with the government of JNK, making large parts in the constitution applicable to the state. As a result, though JNK has a separate constitution and a flag, the parliament's power to make laws on subjects in the union list now is fully accepted. The remaining differences between the other states and the state of JNK are that no emergency due to internal disturbances can be declared in GNK without the concurrence of the state. The union government cannot impose a financial emergency of the state, and the directive principles do not apply in JNK. Finally, amendments to the Constitution can only apply in concurrence with the government of JNK. Many people believe that a formal and strictly equal division of powers applicable to all the units of a federation is adequate. Therefore, whenever such special provisions are created, there is some opposition to it. There is also a fear that such special provisions may lead to separatism in those areas. Therefore, there are controversies about such special provisions. Conclusion: Federalism is like a rainbow where each color is separate, yet together they make a harmonious pattern. Federalism has to continuously maintain a difficult balance between the center and the states. No legal or institutional formula can guarantee the smooth functioning of a federal polity. Ultimately, the people and the political process must develop a culture and a set of values and virtues like mutual trust, toleration, and a spirit of consideration. Federalism celebrates both unity as well as diversity. National unity cannot be built by streamlining differences. Such forced unity only generates only generates greater social strife and alienation and tends finally to destroy unity. Responsive polity sensitive to diversities and to the demands for autonomy can alone be the basis of a cooperative federation.